when I ventured into this project, I had given a lot of credit, as most people have, to Habib Bourguiba. Turns out Habib Bourguiba deserves a lot of credit for the visionary that he was, but he really rode on the shoulders of great Muslim men who came before him and facilitated the way for him. So remember 1930, Tahir Haddad and his treatise, Our Women in Sharia and Society. One of Habib Bourguiba's first acts in power is he takes that treatise and codifies it into law. So in 1956, the Code Statute Personnel, the Family Status Code, gives women as much equality as could have been expected at that time, in that it puts into law the abolishment of polygamy and gives her far more advanced rights. Family planning is part of that reform movement. In 1961, Tunisian women have access to birth control. In 1965, they have access to abortion under certain circumstances. In 1973, the same year as Roe versus Wade, abortion becomes totally legal in Tunisia. So another factor is that over the past few decades since independence, where you had a quadrupling of Arab populations elsewhere, and where the vast majority of Arabs today are under the age of 30, more than 70% are under the age of 30, you had much more moderate growth in terms of populations of Tunisia. But of course, with the emancipation of women, half of the country's energy was released into politics, the economy, culture, and so on. 1958, he puts into effect an education reform movement that, unlike elsewhere in the Arab world, where there was a rejection of everything colonial, the Arabization of curricula, which meant that you didn't have local teachers to deliver the classes. In Tunisia, you had the reform movement that insisted from the beginning on bilingualism, insisted on the presence and the detention of French teachers while Tunisian teachers were taught, insists on universal education in the long run. So we don't jump right into it, we do it gradually, and limits the scope of religion in education systems. So unlike in other places where religion becomes the predominant feature in curricula, one, because Arabization opens the door for it, because everything then becomes taught through the Quran, starting with Arabic as a language, but then everything else. Two, to prop regimes that derive legitimacy from their relationship with Islam, as in the case of Morocco, whose king claims descendants from the Prophet, or where education is politicized through religion. So Jamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt wants to fight the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood, gives reign over the curricula to Al-Azhar, the very conservative Al-Azhar Mosque. In the 1970s, Anwar Sadat, to combat Nasserist ideologies and communist ideologies that were on the rise, gives free reign to the Muslim Brotherhood, and so on and so forth. Tunisia avoided all of this, and as opposed to Turkey and Ataturk, who abolished religion from the education systems altogether, Bourguiba did a couple of things. One, he maintained some room for it, so up to 1 or 2 hours of religious education in the class. Two, he did not come across as an anti-religionist. On the contrary, he came across convincingly as a scholar of Islam. He held his own with Muslim scholars. He brought to his side great religious authorities when he launched the Code Statute Personnel. The one thing that he was not able to win was to provide women with the same inheritance rights as men, because women, according to Sharia, are entitled to only half a man's inheritance. But he found loopholes around it, and he granted women, descendants of a deceased, for example, much greater share of an inheritance than agnate relatives. The issue of inheritance is now back on the table because the current president, Essebsi, has commissioned a committee to look into the issue of granting equal inheritance. So Bourguiba was very, very smart in that he negotiated from within Islam and brought Islamic scholars to his side when introducing all of these reforms. He was also oppressive. He was a dictator. He abused human rights. He stayed in his office for too long. I mean, all of these things need to be acknowledged, but he was a state builder, like very few nation state builders have been.